All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is our first Power Friday for 2024, 2025. It's amazing we're here already. And we got a great turnout. We got some great folks online too. So for folks online, thanks for joining us as well. So our topic today is community engaged research in local context and abroad. So we've got three great speakers. Two of our own faculty members. We have our keynote speaker, Dr. Hyun-Sook from University of Illinois, all the way. It's like when I first went to the Midwest, I didn't realize how close things were. It's like really, Illy is only like 90 minutes away. Because when you live in Texas, you drive for 10 hours, you're still in Texas. So I'm like, she's 90 minutes away. So thanks for making the trip out here to join us. And we'll do introductions of each speakers that come up. But we'll start with our two faculty speakers, starting with Dr. Breanya Hogue. Breanya Hogue, as many of you know, is an assistant professor in literacy and language education in the Department of Curriculum Instruction. Her research interests include pre-service teacher preparation, urban education, communities of practice, children's literature, culturally proactive pedagogy, and literacy engagement. And one of the things that's most related to her talk today, she's the founder of the Purdue Freedom Schools Project, which was established here in 2023. And let me just say, I've never seen a brand new professor like work as hard and pull together so many little pieces of support here and there to be able to launch something so big like their first year. So it's really phenomenal what you've been able to do, and we're looking forward to hearing about that. She got a PhD down the road at IU Bloomington. We're okay with IU. Great school. My daughter went there, and so it's okay. And she's also, if you didn't know that, she's a children's book author. So she's got a couple of, or two or three? Three wonderful children's books that she's written based on her own experience as a teacher. So has a lot of great experience and insights, and turn the time over to you. Thank you.
Excited to be here. I'm gonna see if the Freedom School family will help me. Good morning.
Good morning.
OOGMORNING. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I am excited to share this work, community engaged research through the Purdue Children's Defense Fund CDF Freedom School Program at First United Methodist Church. So what are the CDF Freedom Schools? CDF Freedom Schools it's a national program. It's a summer literacy program. It's 6 weeks, and an overarching theme of I can make a difference. Each week is a different sub-theme. So week 1 is I can make a difference in myself, my family, my community, my country, and my world, and with hope, education, and action. The program is free of charge to marginalized communities. We try to target those families and children that otherwise would not be able to afford a high quality summer enrichment experience. So our program is funded through grants and donations, and the books are culturally relevant. I have our curriculum guide later if you all would like to take a look. Each year, the curriculum is developed by a team of professors and educational consultants, and it is representative of students' lived experiences. The history of the CDF Freedom Schools program. So the original Freedom Schools started during Freedom Summer in 1964. White and Black college students from the North during segregation, they traveled down to the South with the initial goals to help children learn how to read in the South. When they got there, they discovered that adults were struggling with reading. And there were these illegal voter registration tests that were happening. And so they set up Freedom Schools with churches, and they started these programs for children and adults to come and learn how to read. Unfortunately, during that time, they faced a lot of resistance. You know, some churches were targeted, were bombed, people lost their lives. And this work was just really essential at that time. Modern day, Miss Marion Wright Edelman, my soror, she rebranded the Freedom Schools, and the focus was to build a love for reading in children. And so the modern day Freedom Schools, they just celebrated 30 years, was to build that motivation and love for reading. And so universities partner with CDF to host Freedom Schools, juvenile detention centers, community centers, schools, districts, and other people across the country. We have about a little less than 200 sites nationally last summer, and it varies each year. So these are the main program aims: high quality academic enrichment, and that is through our integrated reading curriculum that is facilitated by college age interns, and we train them locally and nationally at the Alex Haley Farm in Clinton, Tennessee. If you don't know Alex Haley, he wrote Roots, and it's just a historic site. And then through our approach, we have parent and family development. It's not just involvement, but also engagement. We want to honor funds of knowledge and make sure we bring the family in and see what their needs are, what are their expertise. They may lead parent meetings. They may come in and read aloud with our scholars. They may lead afternoon activities. So we honor different family backgrounds. We have civic engagement and social action. So every year we have a National Day of Social Action. Our first year that we hosted Freedom School here, it was gun violence and gun safety. And what I found, we'll get into it later, the interns struggled with that because they're like, how do I talk to, first graders about this issue? And they were really, grappling with that. But a lot of our parents came and said, I'm so happy that you were able to have these conversations. I didn't know how to have that. And my son came back and told me this information. And thank you for you all prioritizing that work. Last summer, our issue was book banning and censorship. And so throughout the summer, Dr. Shu, she is a postdoc now in Missouri. She developed a curriculum throughout the summer to help the scholars understand it each week. And then at the end of the summer, we did a National Day of Social Action where they got to protest. And some of the faculty here came and got to see them with their signs and talk about what they learned all summer. And then we do intergenerational servant leadership development. So our servant leader interns that are trained in the program, they are an example to the scholars. A lot of scholars go on after they grow up to become interns for the program. They continue with the program, become elevator trainers. And just to pause my background, I started with Freedom School in 2008 as a junior in college as a servant leader intern, and I went on to become an elevator trainer. I'm now a consultant for this program, and it truly shaped my disposition and understanding of how to work with diverse communities. And so we really instill this kind of like leadership and purpose in the interns, and they continue on for years to come with the program. Nutrition, health, and mental health, we provide free breakfast, snack, and lunch for the children. And we do things like yoga, meditation. They kind of learn how to take care of themselves from the outside inward. And they get to build their home library. So each week they take a book home that we have from the program to take home and build their own libraries. So just an overview, again, it's the intergenerational leadership model. A 10-to-1 ratio, that's really important because in the public schools, we have like, large classrooms, the teachers overwhelmed, understaffed, and you don't have as much support. But Freedom School is really intentional about that 10-to-1 ratio to have that intern building relationships with the scholars and really getting to know their needs and their background. We do have nationally the BRI, the Basic Reading Inventory right now, as a screener for pre and post assessment. And we have found nationally and for our site that scholars, they avoid the summer reading slump. And so they are able to either stay at the same level or gain in their reading levels over the summer. And then parent and family meetings, the engagement is really important. And then our servant leader interns, we measure their dispositions throughout. This is a typical day in Freedom School. So the scholars are dropped off at 8 for breakfast. We do Harambe, which is Kiswahili for Let's Pull Together. It's like a morning celebration pep rally of affirmations. We think about Freedom School. My boss used to say from Freedom School, it's like a roller coaster. So we start out, then the Harambe is kind of like getting them excited for the day and getting them in the mood and excited about reading. We have cheers and chants, and we do different songs about reading. It's like really high energy. I know Dr. Thomas has come and been a read aloud guest. We've had raise your hand if you've read aloud or you work for Freedom School and you're in the room. So it's just really a great experience. And then after that, we get into our integrated reading curriculum. And we have a morning break snack, drop everything and read. Everyone in the site has to read and at that time. And then lunch. And then our afternoon activities, we have actually partnered with the STEM faculty. They lead different workshops and activities with our scholars. I'll talk about other partnerships we have, but these are some other examples of things you'll see. We had a member from the church that led yoga workshops, so she would come in and volunteer her time to do yoga. Jorge was our site coordinator, our grad student. He did a Juneteenth celebration drumming, and so there's all types of activities in the afternoon portion. And again, this is our integrated reading curriculum, and so you can see the books are developmentally appropriate, interesting creative activities, cooperative group work, and encourage young people to involve themselves in community service, no matter their circumstances, and really lets them know, no matter how young you are, you have a voice, you can make a difference. And no, it's not too big, not too small. And so shifting into our local site, Purdue Freedom School at First Church, this was an intentional partnership. I really wanted to partner with a church because I wanted to help pre-service teachers and graduate students see what real community partnership looks like. And so First Church is an amazing place. Pastor Dwayne is very inclusive and very welcoming, and he just loves the program. They have the classroom space, the facilities, but also he supports the vision of Freedom School. And so this was a really impactful partnership. We actually met yesterday evaluating our summer, and he's just on board. He helps with grants, and he just really wants to further that mission. And so I wanted to model for graduate students, how do you build these relationships with community? As you know, often we read about how universities are isolated. How do we work with our local community to implement change? And so this is from our first summer, one of our classrooms. You can see there's a reading circle. There's not like really desks that they sit at. The interns sit at the same level. It's not like the authority in a regular school. You're supposed to be on level. And the scholars are experts as well in Freedom School. And so really the interns are facilitating the conversation and the activities in the classroom. It's not like they are the source of knowledge. And so that is kind of like a little bit of the difference in Freedom School. And so our overarching research questions for this project are, in what ways, if any, does participation in the Purdue CDF Freedom School at First Church, the 6-week summer literacy program, impact K-5 student participants, undergraduate pre-service teachers, or graduate students, parents and guardians, staff, and overall community partners and volunteers? And then also, does the Purdue Freedom School program function as a legitimate community of practice, Wenger, 2009? And if so, in what ways and what elements are present? And so we're looking at this as an interconnected community of practice, looking at not just the child, but how does family involvement impact and shape that child's learning? The pre-service teachers are the servant leader interns that work with them, that community, that church partnership, and then all those other stakeholders that come into play. And so our first summer, we had 30 scholars. I was overly ambitious. We had 60 this past summer. It was a big jump. And then we had 4 interns the first summer. We had 7 this past, and was a mixture of undergrad and graduate this past. The first year we had all undergraduate. And one recent, she finished at Purdue, but she's a classroom teacher now. And we had 2 site coordinators both years, a project director, and 2 executive directors. And then Christy was kind of like our associate research partner through the Clear Center. And so that was kind of like the overview. And then we also had a number of faculty, including Dr. Neal-Stanley. She helped with the religious part, and I'll get into that, of our research, really being intentional about how the church partnered with us. We didn't want this to be transactional of us just hosting our program and leaving, but what is their role in this project as well? And we had Dr. Shepherds that helped with family home visits, so the family engagement piece. So we also wanted to see what were the language practices at home. And so she helped with some of that. And then our STEM faculty with their workshop. So we'll talk about some of the different levels here. So I'm not going to get into all of this, but these are all the different inquiries that kind of branched off from the project, because we are interested in the scholars' learning and their impact. How did it shape their social emotional learning, their motivation, their attitudes, their identity, perception of self-identity? For our interns, how does this experience shape their understanding of culturally responsive teaching and social justice? And we'll talk about some of the findings, preliminary findings from that. And then again, when we think about church and ministry, we really involved the pastor because he wanted his church to have an active role in this. And he said, you know, that his church had a limited understanding of ministry. What does ministry work look like? If we're taking on a project like Freedom School, how do we actively engage in that? And so Dr. Neal-Stanley helped myself and the pastor develop like this Freedom Sunday School curriculum. And so last summer, each Sunday, we talked about what is the history of the Methodist Church and understanding the AME Church and the history of like segregation and understanding the Freedom School history. And so for his members to understand their implicit bias, their perceptions, how to work with other families of color, of marginalized communities. And so we did some of that work last summer, and we have some work that some publications we're working on right now. And then also family, thinking about how this program welcome them and how can it inform their experience in the public school, the ways that they interact within this program. So this is just a little example of some of the work from the STEM group. They worked with visuospatial reasoning and mapping skills. And so you can see they went from like 2D to 3D. And so every week they would come 2 days a week and lead STEM workshops with the scholars, and the scholars love it. And so this is just an example of that. And so, of course, pre-service teacher education, that's the main focus of this project. And so from our first summer, we are currently working on this work, Walk It Like You Talk It, the Freedom School National Training as a pre-service teacher, cultural immersion experience for pre-service teachers, grappling with self-identities and positionalities. And I'm just going to read one example of what one of the interns stated from last summer after they went to the national training experience, which is like over 2,000 interns from across the nation. So the middle one, I just feel like I stand out as a sore thumb. And especially when they do talk about white people and the injustices, because I guess I am white. And so like, I feel very bad, and I can tell like I'm being judged because I am there trying to, you know, advocate Blacks and I'm white. But like the stuff and, you know, passionate about and I like want to help. It's just that they definitely have a different view on me. I can tell that just by like it, when you're trying to recommend stuff, you know, speak up and they're dancing and moving and yelling. But if I were to do that, it would be very odd. They're like, okay, so I won't do that anymore. So this is very like common for what I'm finding in Freedom School, regardless of, you know, white or other cultures. Freedom School is a immersion experience. It's like a culture shock when they go to this national training because it's rooted in Black history, and the ways that we dance and we celebrate and that we are. Where our site is situated here in Indiana, like our interns going there, it was, you know, definitely a new experience for them. And so from the first summer, the researchers and I got together and we're working on this work. And, you know, this is all about pivoting. I decided that our site needed a little bit more before they went to the national training and did the Freedom School. So we developed a course, and Dr. Neal-Stanley had told me about this, and we actually read this in our course this week, L500, EDCY I-500. But from Dr. Silly Ruiz, this racial literacy development model. And so we kind of talked about this, and I used it as a way to inform the course that I developed for before this new summer. And so thinking about how can we get our pre-service teachers to practice critical love and working with other communities. And so it talks about humility, critical reflection, historical literacy, understanding what is Freedom School, what's the historical significance, what is going on in this project. Archaeology of self, looking at their own beliefs, exploring those, the biases and the shape that shape how they engage in this work. And then interruption. So like after they do all that, now they can be comfortable with talking about gun violence or, talking about these critical issues. And so this is what informed kind of the revamping. And so in the spring of last year, this 591 I developed for those who worked with it within Freedom School. We did a lot of that work. The text for that course we read, Whiteness Interrupted, White Teachers and Racial Identity in Predominantly Black Schools. And so each week they read this and kind of reflected on it and got to understand how their identity related to that. They did some reflexivity. We talked about culturally, linguistically diverse children and families, did some case studies. We did a little bit of practicum experience with the Klondike Kids Club. And so they got to work with those communities, analyze freedom song lyrics and what those meant. Some of the students are here, they're like shaking their head. Demonstrations, embodiment. We did Harambe in class, so they wouldn't be overwhelmed when they got to national training. So we practiced in class what that looks like and the meaning of it. And they got to feel it. They said, if we didn't do Harambe, they were like, can we please do it? I need that. Like I had a rough week, Dr. Hogue. Can we actually do some of it? And they like to do the motivational song. And so they saw the importance of this work. And then right now, our dissemination, these are some of the papers that have emerged from the project. So currently we're working on a multimodal literacy, pedagogies, and languaging paper with Dr. Shu. Pre-service teacher graduate dispositions in the culturally relevant program, faith-based partnerships, family involvement versus engagement, and then a lot of graduate inquiry projects. I'm sure in the room they can talk about. And then these are some of the conferences that we have upcoming. Some of our partners include Junior Achievement, so they helped with the afternoon activities, developing some work with money management with the students. They enjoy that, understanding needs and wants, and then Franciscan Health. These are some of our grantors and sponsors. The Honors College helped with our curriculum, funding our curriculum last year. The Methodist Church Diversity Missions and Justice Ministries gives every year to our program. The Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Belonging, Renee Thomas, thank you, Dr. Gates, College of Education and Center for Literacy and Language, Cooking Matters. They do cooking workshops with our families and children. They love that. They get to cook with their parents and learn healthy recipes and take those groceries home. And the Indie Hunger Network, and then the free summer program. And then also First Church, thank you. Thank you so much. And that is the end of my presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you. In a few minutes, are there any questions for you? And anyone online, feel free to type a question or unmute.
There wasn't a
So
pause
quick.
icon.
Yeah.
Time's at 10:41.
You were too thorough.
Well,
I did pretty good.
I'm just curious, what is
Jump
the
in. What amazing
responses from the kids been like between the first year, the second year, did they have the option to come back, a lot of first year kids?
Yeah,
Back,
we had,
how's it been for the kids?
that's so great. That's a good question. We had a lot of returners. Like half of the students were returners, and you can tell. And it's so cute to see like the returners and the new students when Harambe in the program. They're like, "This is how you do it. This is how you do the chant." And our parents tell us they've seen tremendous growth in confidence, especially like in the new ones this year. Like we had some scholars that were brand new, and throughout the summer, they just blossomed. They were so confident. And then also reading. I had parents tell me throughout the year, they noticed like their student was speaking up more in class, and just great gains and motivation. They want to read more at home. So they love it. So definitely.
What specifically do you most want to teach young people today, and why?
What do I most want?
Yeah.
Probably the theme, I could make a difference, like just letting them know that you don't have to wait until you get a certain age. Like there's little things you can do in your community, like, picking up trash, or, if you see someone that's in need, you can help them, letting them know how they can advocate for others and themselves. I think that's just teaching them about humanity and just basic, care. I think those are like the main things I would like to teach children. Yeah.
For those teachers in preparation who, reading that quote was just so powerful, right? How do you debrief with them so that they don't go away from the experience feeling really bad about, being a teacher of students who, multiculturally or race or whatever difference there may be?
That is a really good, we grapple with that as admin in Freedom School. For example, we have scholars with a lot of behavior challenges and in foster care, and they act out, throw chairs and they get upset. And for our interns, it's really overwhelming for them. And so we just really try to help them understand. I brought in Dr. Case, and she did like a workshop, trauma-informed practices, and teaches them some ways that you can communicate with those scholars, and understanding it's not about you personally. They have unmet needs at home. And so we try to scaffold for them, and we try to support them. So most of the days I was at the site. I wasn't supposed to be, but I was in the classroom or pulling those scholars, and I would just try to help them and have conversations with those scholars and calm them down and model for the intern. And the 6 weeks is a short time. And I have grace and patience that sometimes it doesn't click for the interns in that 6 weeks. Sometimes after the program, things are they're understanding like, oh. And then also transferring theory to practice. We read about it. Sometimes I would get frustrated. I'm like, guys, we read about this in class. Like, you all are not, remember I told you all this was going to be hard. I told you we're going to work with this community, but it doesn't happen that quick. Sometimes afterwards, they're starting to understand, oh, okay, I get it. And so we have to have as much practical experience for them, but also scaffold. Just like we scaffold for our children, we have to scaffold for our pre-service teachers and our graduate students. And I think that's important. It's an ongoing process. It's not like I taught you, you better implement it. Like we talked about it, and I have that patience with them. Yeah.
Such an important experience, I think, for them as they begin to develop their own identity as an educator.
Right.
And
Kind of only question?
How do you select in terms of these service teachers they get?
That's a good question. Here it's hard because everybody leaves in the summer. Nobody stays around. But last year we had really great graduate students that they teach our undergraduates, but they hadn't had that practical experience. So this was good for them to have that experience. Then we had undergraduate student that was a student in one of our graduate students course. This year, Jorge's helped me because we've been attending a lot of events on campus through cultural centers, and we've been able to do some call out sessions this time and invite more students. Another thing, you don't have to be an education major to be a servant leader intern. Across the nation, everybody's not an education major because our training prepares anyone. And we found, there's a lack of Black male teachers. Freedom School has been able to address that because people from other majors come to work for Freedom School, and then they end up wanting to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And so we kind of recruit people into the pipeline through the program. And so that's also a benefit of it. So yeah,
Fantastic.
definitely.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. And if you're interested, I'm sure Dr. Hogue would love more volunteers. So.
Oh, we definitely need volunteers.
That's all right. We're gonna do a little stage set up here, but while we do that, I'll introduce our next speaker. We have Dr. Neal-Stanley. He's an assistant professor of curriculum studies in the Department of Curriculum Instruction. Her research agenda converges at the intersection of Black education studies, critical qualitative inquiry, and faith as a vehicle for education transformation. We saw a nice sample here, the synergy between these two presentations. So, her research, teaching, and service are informed by her lived experiences as a Detroit public school teacher, student, as well as professional experiences as a social worker and a public elementary school teacher. Did you teach at Detroit or where
I didn't. I've been trying to get, my family's been trying to get me back to Detroit, but no.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
And Dr. Neal-Stanley is committed to preparing diverse students to address structural inequity, remember the Black radical traditions, and employ humanizing pedagogical and research approaches. Her recent research has been published in Curriculum Inquiry, Religion and Education, Equity and Excellence in Education, and Qualitative Inquiry. An award-winning educator and scholar. Last year, she won our Outstanding Faculty Teaching Award. And this year, she is a research fellow to the Crossroads Project at the Center for Culture, Society, and Religion at Princeton University. We've heard of that, so congratulations on that. She has her PhD from University of Georgia in Educational Theory and Practice, so that's for you.
If I'm being honest, I'm gonna cover a lot of material, so I'm gonna try to go through it as fast as possible without missing the message. So good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Dr. Wright and Julie and team for inviting me to share. Thank you so much, Dr. Hogue, for getting us kicked off so beautifully. I know it's Friday, you guys could be anywhere else but here. But I'm so honored that you guys decided to join us. And so again, my name is Dr. Neal-Stanley, and I am an assistant professor in curriculum studies here in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. And this morning, I'll be presenting the fugitive spirit of historical Black women teachers, theorizing hush harbors as Praxis. So before getting into my content, I want to see what folks already know about hush harbors. So what is it? And this is not rhetorical. I would really like to know what folks in the audience already know about hush harbors. Or you can speculate based off of those two words. Teachers, I don't want to cold call you.
Silencing, is this something to do with silencing?
Silencing, okay.
Is it a place where they would get together to be with
Like a secret place, hush hush.
Yeah, like
Okay. Okay, secret place that folks will get together, okay?
For a safe place to.
Safe place. Okay, great. So that's our starting point. So before getting into my research, I think it's really important to provide some historical context, which really lays the necessary groundwork for how I'm thinking about this notion of the hush harbors in the context of schools. So in 1800, Gabriel Prosser, a literate enslaved blacksmith and preacher, planned a large slave revolt in Richmond, Virginia. Information regarding the revolt was leaked prior to its execution, and as a result, he and his followers were subsequently taken captive and hanged. Similarly, Denmark Vesey was a formerly enslaved carpenter and preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal or AME Church, who allegedly inspired and led the most extensive effort to organize a slave insurrection in U.S. history. Just days before the arranged attack on July 14, 1822, their plans were exposed and a militia was sent to arrest the leaders and suspected accomplices. While plans for insurrection were interrupted prior to their implementation in both Prosser and Vesey's cases, in Nat Turner's case, plans actualized. So Nat Turner was a literate slave preacher who led the bloodiest slave rebellion in the history of the U.S. on August 21st, 1831. He and his followers rampaged from plantation to plantation, killing nearly 60 whites. Insurrectionists contested the absence of freedom, refused gradual abolitionist tactics, and rejected the impossibility of being freed by their owners. They carefully planned and enacted violent uprisings to immediately overturn the institution of slavery. Yet any effort to understand their radical actions without a consideration of their faith is to miss a fundamental piece of Black American history. So indeed, the rebellions of Prosser, VC, and Nat Turner were spiritually impelled and deeply rooted in their Christian values and a divine mandate to actualize freedom. And further, their elaborate plans for insurrection were developed during the religious meetings of the enslaved. So I will give you guys just a second to read the slides to yourself. So while the first restrictions on slave assembly appeared in colonial codes during the late 1600s, in the aftermath of Nat Turner's rebellion, it roused anxiety, suspicion, and fear among white Americans, resulting in laws greatly restricting the mobility of the enslaved, otherwise known as slave codes. Partly because Turner was literate and a preacher, Southern state legislatures passed new laws prohibiting the education of the enslaved, as well as restricting their rights of assembly and other civil liberties. This resulted in the religious meetings of the enslaved being organized and overseen by white slaveholders. So the space where Black people could freely express their faith in meaningful and life-giving ways was now under the strict surveillance and control of white slaveholders who emphasized, staunch obedience and demonized their indigenous African faith practices. And it was these restrictions that created the conditions for stealing away. So despite these limitations, enslaved people still gathered to dance, to worship, to sing, to mourn and pray, harnessing both faith and freedom through varied acts of fugitivity. They gathered in what Albert Rabitaux calls the invisible institution, or these informal places of worship where enslaved people practice their own version of Christianity, and oftentimes in secret. Despite popular belief, Christianized enslaved people did not simply comply with the religion of their oppressors. In fact, they hated the corrupted gospel that they were being preached. Instead, they syncretized their African spiritual and cultural sensibilities into their own distinct embodiment of Christianity. And so these invisible churches taught a completely different message from the white-controlled churches. And one such example during the antebellum era is the Hush Harbor. So the Hush Harbor refers to a secret meeting place where enslaved people would hold religious services in the secluded places, including woods, ravines, valleys, and areas with lots of brush to provide cover. Temporarily escaping into the night, enslaved people stepped out from the panopticon of whiteness to take rest in the shadow of the Almighty. So in what follows, I will go a bit more into detail about what the Hush Harbor entailed. So consecrated in the wilderness, enslaved people created a ground-swelling rupture to the slave system, not only by running away from, but running to something else. According to Dunkley, fugitivity was not only resistance to enslavement or even an attempt to escape, but an assertion of the freedom that enslaved people always knew that they had. And thinking about this notion of fugitivity in the Hush Harbor, formerly enslaved Simon Brown characterized this place clearly saying, they cherished meetings of their own where they could relax and enjoy the form of worship that pleased them and uplifted their spirit. They would steal away into the woods and meet in what they called the invisible church or the Hush Harbor, where they constructed meeting places made from the branches of trees. There was no pretending in those prayer meetings. There was a living faith in a just God who would one day answer the cries of his poor Black children and deliver them from their enemies. But the slaves never said a word to their white folk about this kind of faith. So yet the material reality outside of the Hush Harbor was that evil was always present, danger was always lurking, and death was looming. The enslaved risked being beaten or even killed if caught attending these secret worship assemblies. And as a result, great care was taken to avoid detection. Congregants of the Hush Harbor also created an innovative system of codes, chants, and subversive activities to notify each other of the secret worship meetings. So spirituals like go down Moses, wade in the water, and still away to Jesus were all laced with encrypted directions, multiple meanings, signals, and hidden messages about the spiritual journey of faith, as well as the physical journey of escape. So Richard Carruthers, a formerly enslaved congregant in Tennessee and Texas, remembered his experience in the Hush Harbor. And I'll give you a few seconds to read his words to yourself. So famished and physically exhausted from toiling in the hot sun from sunup to sundown, enslaved people gathered at night in the Hush Harbor to worship, often until the sun came back up. Getting quote unquote full of the Lord in the Hush Harbor resulted in a sort of metaphysical supernatural exchange where hunger was replaced with fullness, exhaustion was replaced for rest, despair for hope, and grief for joy. Now, joy, if ever, is associated with an institution so entrenched in horror, degradation, and brutal dehumanization. Yet, as Carruthers' account suggests, it was in the presence of God and community that they found the fullness of their joy. And so indeed, the Hush Harbor was much more than a stealthy routine or a Sunday meeting. It was an embodied stealing away that gave rise to a spiritual stealing away. And as Metzger 2019 writes, the Hush Harbor is a spiritual place where one leaves the mundane and enters the spiritual realm, oftentimes to return to the mundane, now transformed. So physical violence was often the price for transcendent Black being beyond the reach of whiteness. Yet while they were physically in bondage, their spirits were free, enabling enslaved people to live radically joyful, full, vibrant, abundant, and faith-filled lives. So in this way, the spirit of the Hush Harbor was too powerful, too deep, too omnipresent, too abiding to be confined or contained in these secret worship meetings. Hush Harbors then were not just a location, it's not just a destination or a visitation. Instead, it is a habitation. It is a secret and sacred place of refuge that was rooted and grounded in the spirit of the enslaved. And so now that we've established what the Hush Harbor is, for the remainder of my presentation, I'll discuss the ways that historical Black women embodied Hush Harbors as praxis. So to theorize this, I read together three conceptual threads: womanist theology, marginality, and Black educational fugitive space. So because I don't have that much more time, if you want to take a screenshot of that, you can, or I can ask, you guys can ask questions about it afterwards. But taken together, each of these conceptual threads provide the grounding for my theorization of Hush Harbors.
This also be part of the recording for a few minutes.
Perfect. Okay. So I theorize Hush Harbors as a spiritually grounded praxis that operates both within and outside of oppressive sites, but always from the space of the margin. They depart from the conditions of anti-Blackness to nurture healing, well-being, and wholeness. Created for and by Black people, specifically in the areas of teaching and learning, Hush Harbors are a space and/or place to envision our material worlds otherwise, specifically by shifting the perspective from the natural to the spiritual. Spirituality then is central to the praxis of Hush Harbors. So Hush Harbors as praxis include 5 tenets: fugitivity, sanctuary, communion, subversion, and syncretism. So fugitivity refers to temporarily escaping from oppression and anti-Blackness, and can be a physical, curricular, or an emotional escape. Sanctuary refers to a place of physical, psychological, and spiritual safety and refuge. Communion refers to working in tandem with communities with shared purpose to affect change. That reminds me a lot of Dr. Hogue's work in Harambe. Also, subversion refers to these secret teachings and pedagogy that undermine dominant ideology. And then finally is syncretism. This is the notion that the instruction and improvement of Black students must be both spiritual and intellectual. So it is a moral and spiritual uplift. So because of my limited time, I'm just going to cover a few of these tenets, but I do have a QR code at the end for the full paper if anyone is interested. So for Black people, learning to read and write was not merely a pathway forward toward economic mobility. It was an assertion of their own humanity and resistance to being propertied. As such, literacy was an instrument of both resistance and liberation. The imminence of danger and death meant that Black women, oftentimes acting as quote unquote rebel literates, often took great risks to share the education and literacy that they acquired. As a result, they escaped and constructed makeshift schools, very reminiscent of the Hush Harbor. An incident in the life of a slave girl, Harriet Jacobs, pictured here, in 1861, documented how she was born into slavery and gained freedom for herself and her children. While many accounts of Jacobs' life center her escape from slavery in 1842, she had already engaged in the practice of educational fugitivity in her hidden efforts to instruct 53-year-old Fred. She wrote, "I knew an old man whose piety and childlike trust in God were beautiful to witness. At 53 years old, he joined the Baptist church. He had a most earnest desire to learn to read. He thought he should know how to serve God better if he could only read the Bible. He came to me and begged me to teach him. He said he could not pay me for he had no money, but he would bring me nice fruit when the season for it came. I asked him if he didn't know it was contrary to law and that slaves were whipped and imprisoned for teaching each other to read. This brought the tears into his eyes. 'Don't be troubled, Uncle Fred,' said I. 'I have no thoughts of refusing to teach you. I only told you of the law that you might know the danger and be on your guard.' He thought he could plan to come 3 times a week without this being suspected. I selected a quiet nook where no intruder was likely to penetrate, and there I taught him his ABCs. Considering his age, his progress was astonishing. As soon as he could spell in 2 syllables, he wanted to spell out words in the Bible. The happy smile that illuminated his face put joy into my heart. After spelling out a few words, he paused and said, 'Honey, it appears when I can read this book, this good book, I shall be nearer to God. I only want to read this book that I may know how to live, and I have no fear about dying.' I tried to encourage him by speaking of the rapid progress he had made. 'Have patience, child,' he replied. 'I learned slow.' I had no need of patience. His gratitude and the happiness I imparted were more than a recompense for all my trouble." So Jacobs was well aware of the dangers of the law that restricted literacy for enslaved people. Despite these restrictions, however, she embodied fugitivity and effectively etched out a small, quiet space to deaden the dehumanizing system of enslavement that restricted Black literacy. Susie King Taylor was a nurse and teacher in the 1st Black Regiment of the Civil War. Her 1902 autobiography, Reminiscences of My Life in Camp, chronicles daily life on the battlefront and her efforts to educate Black soldiers. It also details her early schooling experiences, in particular, attending secret schools headed by Black women teachers. Taylor was born enslaved in 1848, but was permitted to live with her grandmother in Savannah, Georgia at age 7. Taylor's technically free status released her from physical labor and enabled her to pursue an education. However, they were constrained to learn in secret still because both the state of Georgia and the city of Savannah made it illegal to teach enslaved or free people of color to read and write. As a result, Black teachers and students engaged in education, often by utilizing subversive techniques and creative methods of evasion. Writing on her experiences, Susie King Taylor recalled, "My brother and I, being the 2 eldest, were sent to a friend of my grandmother, Mrs. Woodhouse, a widow, to learn to read and write. She was a free woman and lived on Bay Lane between Habersham and Price Streets, about a half mile from my house. We went every day about 9 o'clock with our books wrapped in paper to prevent the police or white persons from seeing them. We went in one at a time through the gate into the yard to the L kitchen, which was the schoolroom. She had 25 or 30 children whom she taught, assisted by her daughter, Mary Jane. The neighbors would see us going in sometimes, but they supposed we were learning trades, as it was the custom to give children a trade of some kind. After school, we left the same way we entered, one by one, when we would go to a square about a block from the school and wait for each other. As Taylor's narrative suggests, Black students often took special care to avoid detection while going to and from school, and were co-conspirators in the Fugitive project of Black education. Indeed, both the Black women teachers and the Black students operated in good faith and trust in each other, with the shared understandings of the practices, purposes, and penalties of their subversion. So subversion, or the secret teachings, practices, and pedagogies that undermine dominant ideology, are a central element of Hush Harbors. Subversion challenges norm protocols of racial domination and educational exclusion by working within it. So therein lies a creative, performative mode of resistance among Black women teachers and students to engage in routine Black life while subversively destabilizing oppressive systems. So historical Black women teachers survived and miraculously thrived amid enslavement and unimaginable horror. They boldly subverted hegemonic structures, placing their students, their Black students, families, and communities above restrictive laws and looming consequences. As a result, they not only created liberatory space to resist the antagonism toward Black being, but constructed spaces of Black well-being. Black women teachers in history embodied a fugitive spirit by creating educational spaces that nurtured the minds and spirits of Black students, despite the oppressive systems that they were a part of. And as these radical Black women teachers demonstrate, Hush Harbors were not just theoretical, but had real-world transformative impacts on their communities. And as this presentation documents, historical Black women teachers cleaved to this liminal marginal space, not as a site of exclusion or abandonment, but one of spiritual groundedness, supernatural freedom, and radical impossibilities. The liberatory praxis of Hush Harbors, coupled with the spirit, the fugitive spirit of historical Black women teachers, can teach us a lot about the legacy and significance of Black subversive resistance, Black women's pedagogical genius and excellence, and the radical faith that has sustained the Black spirit for generations. And so in conclusion, Hush Harbors have the potential to offer a new geography for more liberatory Black educational futures. For it is in the shadows, the alleyways, the undergrounds, the undercommons, and these unregulated spaces that can make way for creative, cultural, and spiritual expressions of love, joy, faith, creativity, freedom dreaming, and power that enable us to become and be fully free. And so I ask the audience again to complete this sentence. A hush harbor is what? What is it? You can just say one word, that's fine.
Freedom.
It's freedom, thank you.
A liberatory space.
A liberatory space, thank you.
Peace.
Peace, thank you.
Resistance.
Resistance.
Survival,
Say one more time.
survival,
Survival mode,
a way out,
a way out,
spiritual safety.
spiritual safety, I love that.
Faith.
Faith. Yeah,
The space you create for your community, whether that be a classroom, your workspace.
Yep. absolutely.
Courageous space.
Courageous faith. Thank y'all so much. So this is a QR code for the paper, the full paper, if anybody's interested in reading my long paper.
We have time for a few questions. Any questions for this? We'll say. Also, all those online, feel free to type in a question or unmute.
I can't help but see the connections between our
Yeah,
work,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yep.
And we need to work on how Freedom School can be considered a hush harbor.
Sure.
I have a question about the research projects. You're doing a lot of historical work here. So you can tell us about the research process you go through, finding these materials and
Sure.
bringing together from your frameworks.
Sure. So it's really interesting because this was part of my dissertation research, actually. And I was one of the lucky ones to actually dissertate during the pandemic. So my plan, it was so my plan was actually, and I got grant funding and everything to go to these archival repositories across the nation. But of course, COVID came and shut everything down. So now what I had to do was make use of digital repositories. And so ever since the pandemic, to be honest, a lot of these museum sites, the Library of Congress, they've been working overtime to digitize a lot of these materials. And there are some like institutional repositories across the nation who do a really great job of archiving Black life across history. So one is the University of North Carolina. They have a digital archival repository called Documenting the South. And so they have like full autobiographies of these women who I mentioned here. And that was really helpful because I wanted to hear about their experiences from them, not from other people who had wrote about their experiences. I wanted to hear from them. So just making use of these digital resources.
Been able to go back in person since things slow down?
I haven't, but I do have plans to,
Okay,
hopefully
good.
next summer.
Good.
Yeah.
So you started and ended with this, the question about hush harbors.
Mhm.
And I know that something important to you is, Black educational historical consciousness. So like helping to raise that.
Yeah.
Could you say some more about that and how that kind of connects to hush harbors and your interest there?
Of course, it would be my doctoral advisee to give me this.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, that's one of my main purposes and focuses as a professor, as an advisor, as a teacher, is to help raise students' overall consciousness of not just Black history, but also this history of Black education. I think for a lot of us within the field of education, we are not informed of this history. If we think even now, if I go back, I don't know if I can go back to my previous slide.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Just that one, yep, that's perfect, yep. So if you guys notice here, this is of course what a cell, right? And so if you guys notice all around it, this was supposed to be representative of the climate of education right now. So low expectations, white supremacy, Black suffering, book bans, anti-literacy law, even today. All of these things are happening both within and outside of education spaces. And so the hush harbor exists within those structures, but it also exists outside of those structures. And so, yeah, one of my things is that I wanted students to not just be aware of what they were against, but being aware of the ways that Black people have always created these liberatory Black educational spaces, even amidst all of the things happening. So that is really important.
I just think about, as teachers, we all know about MASLA, right?
Yeah.
And we're told they've got to have these basic needs met before any of the other needs, higher order needs, maybe we'll call them, can be met. And I just think about how this turns Maslow on his head,
It does.
right?
It does.
Because we're talking about supernatural freedom
Mhm.
without, with bruises and beatings and no food and working so hard and being completely physically exhausted in different ways and in many ways, but yet they could thrive and it's another level.
Yes. Yeah, and I told my husband, I said, if I make it through it without tears, I'm doing good. But you were about to get me caught
Yeah, I
up.
know, right?
So, I will just say that I think the spiritual side, it is so fragmented in education. And I think,
Yeah.
what does it mean for us to meet our students' needs physically, but also their emotional needs, their spiritual needs, right? What does it mean to see them as, as fully human, mind, body, and spirit?
Yeah.
That part is oftentimes missing. So yeah.
One of the things that struck me about your diagram there on the bottom, spirit murder, and that's gonna make me cry. Because,
It's what's missing in education.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so how would, you suggest, that this be incorporated into pre-service teacher training as, that we, teaching them how to deliver a lesson, how to prepare a lesson, but how would this component be a part of pre-service teacher?
I think that's a great question. And at the risk of being prescriptive, I want to leave that question for you. Because Hush Harbors, again, is not just a place, it's not just place or space making. A Hush Harbor can be in literature, it can be in curriculum, it can be in practice, it can be in interpersonal communication. You can create a Hush Harbor, just you and a person having a conversation that allows their spirit to be free, to feel free. So it doesn't have to be prescriptive in that way. I think a first step would be to just acknowledge that we as people are tripart beings and that we do have a mind, body, and spirit. I think that is something that is interesting. I think it could also be contested in educational or even higher education spaces. But that's one start that I would say is that to look at a child holistically is not just looking at their home lives and their communities and their cultures, but also seeing them as not just having an intellect in their mind, not just that mind as being part of their body, but also that they have a spirit. And I think that part is critically absent from a lot of literature. So I would start that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please introduce Dr. Hyun-Sook Kang. She is a associate professor of education policy, organization, and leadership at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She received her PhD in education linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education in 2007. And prior to her post in EPAL, she was on the faculty in the linguistics department at Illinois State University. And we overlapped a little bit at the University of Texas at San Antonio, about 50, 60 years ago, it seems like. Wow. Dr. Kang's research interests center on language, practice, and ideology in relation to global mobility, such as immigration and study abroad. Her recent research has examined student agency, belief, and identity and context with implications for teacher development and internationalization of education. She is also interested in ontological, epistemological, and methodological considerations in educational research. Widely published scholar, her works appeared in journals such as American Journal of Distance Education, the Bible Research Journal, International Journal of Bible Education and Bilingualism, Language Awareness, Modern Language Journal, and TESOL Quarterly. I have the privilege of co-editing with Dr. Kang the Journal of Language, Identity, and Education. And just so, in fact, I probably email her more than I do folks here at Purdue. So we're constantly in communication. And recently she is the co-editor of this wonderful book, Online Education for Teachers of English as a Global Language. And so I highly recommend this as well if you'd like to see that. So without further ado, we're going to now zoom out from local community to international and abroad. So Dr. Kang, you're on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for the nice introduction, and thank you for having me today. So I'm here to share my recent research about study abroad in the internationalization of education, focused on language learners' beliefs and engagement. I'm a faculty member in a program called Global Studies in Education. We go by GSE in the Department of Education Policy, Organization, and Leadership. It's like shortened as EPAL. Okay, so here's the overview of today's talk. So I will start with a discussion about internationalization of education, focused on internationalization abroad for now for this paper. And then I will turn to individual difference in the context of study abroad, more specifically looking at class defined as global mobility, access to global mobility. And then I will turn to language ideology as a conceptual lens. and to share a comparative case study of two language learners who participated in a short-term study abroad. To address the question, how does social class influence language learners' beliefs and ideologies about English language learning during study abroad? So, internationalization of education, many definitions abound. Here's the definition that this paper will be following. Defined as a process of integrating international and intercultural components into the curriculum, teaching, assessment, and also academic support services such as ESL programs, ESL courses. And here are some different types of internationalization. But in terms of direction of mobility, it could be outward or inward. In terms of the process, it could be expansion or relocation. So relocating people, knowledge, cultures, and even things like the pedagogical models. So the literature is reported, developing countries mostly pursue inward expansion or relocation. Poor or Anglophone Western developed countries mostly pursue outward expansion or relocation. So here are some different examples, cases of internationalization. So I'd like to invite you to have a look. So for this paper, I'll be looking at relocation. So more specifically, study abroad or internationalization abroad, looking at relocation outward or inward. So the paper I'm sharing today will be more specifically Korean-speaking college students doing study abroad in the US. So it will be an example of outward relocation according to the model of internationalization. So on top of short-term international programs, it could be ESL service courses and programs, intensive English institute, and such. So there has been a ton of literature about study abroad in the context of language learning, looking into different aspects, different outcomes of language development. However, there have been mixed results when it comes to the effects of the study abroad on second language proficiency. And then another line of work has been documenting changes or shifts as a result of study abroad, focusing on different constructs such as learner motivation, sojourner identity, as a heritage language speaker or as an intersectional identity, and also language learners' beliefs, thinking, or attitudes when it comes to things like the task of a second language learning, as well as towards the host culture, the target language. More lately, growing number of studies have documented the intersections of educational justice and social justice and study abroad as well, looking into different issues and factors, including race and ethnicity, and the status, the power structures and values of the target language or different languages in a sending country, in a host country, and also social class. So the paper I'm sharing will be focusing on social class. Again, many definitions abound. The study will be adopting the definition of social class as a construct that embodies the social status and practices afforded by different relationships and resources that individuals, students, teachers inherit or build. So in the literature of international education, one study after another have been reporting opportunities for global mobility are associated with the socioeconomically privileged students' pursuit of, extracurricular opportunities to expand their horizon and such. In the literature about language teaching, English language learning, native-like English accents or English skills obtained by way of international travels or study abroad have been reported to be indicative of upper middle class family practices, including countries like South Korea, the sending country in this study. Okay, so moving on to the conceptual lens, language ideology. So referring to the abstract and often implicit belief systems about language and linguistic behavior, situated conceptions and underlying thoughts about the use of a language in the social context in the outside world. Language ideology is not just about opinions and beliefs about language, but also about speakers and their individual and group identities. And also, what's more, speakers' language ideologies may change across different contexts and also evolve over time. Often mediated through different seminar resources and also power structures, power systems in the social world. So when it comes to the ideology of English as a foreign language, the studies have been reporting this ideology kind of used as a way to promote the native speakers of the UK and North America, conceiving English as the ethnically unified language of these a few inner circle countries, and also as a means of accessing the knowledge produced by in the West. As a result, or on a related note, teachers and students, language learners in non-Anglophone countries, places like South Korea, the sending country in this study, may view English as a living artifact or heuristic tool for accessing, getting at Western knowledge and culture. Something unique about Korean speakers of English, though, the literature has been reporting the ideology of self-deprecation. So like the Korean speakers constantly apologizing. I'm so sorry, my English is not good enough. Unique about Korean speakers of English. So here's the case study I'd like to share today, asking the question, how does social class impact language learners, study abroad participants, ideologies about English language learning during study abroad? So the focal participants of the study were, whose pseudonyms were Larry and Fiona, part of a cohort of 10 teacher candidates from the same university, from the same sending country, hosted by the same program in the US. So these two participants were selected because they were uniquely different, comparative. Okay, so the development of the study abroad program, a group of faculty members got a grant from the South Korean government, and they reached out to us. I was part of the host country, host institution, by the way, despite the fact I'm originally from South Korea, in order to promote teacher candidates' awareness of globalization and multiculturalism, and also to improve their English language skills, not about academic skills, but mostly really focused on English for classroom instructional purposes. That's how they got the funding support. After many weeks of back and forth email correspondences, a memorandum of understanding was established between the two institutions. And then 10 teacher candidates were recruited, funded by the sending university. In terms of their GPAs and also their performance during interviews conducted by the sending university in the medium of English. Okay? And also the sending university took into account the diversity, the variation in terms of academic programs. So this program was not all about English language teachers, like a range of different content areas were included, represented. The implementation of the study abroad program was really focused on local practices in response to the sending university's request for instructional programs and activities to cultivate teacher candidates' global awareness composed of these activities. I'd like to invite you to have a look. Feel free to stop me. Okay. Any questions? Okay, then I'm gonna move on to the methods. In order to conduct this case study, three sources of data were collected. The weekly reflections on Band, a mobile app popular among Korean speakers, as shown in the screenshot here, and group discussions during the program, mostly in small groups of 5 people in the dorm building, and individual interviews at the conclusion of the program. Okay, and thematic analysis of these narrative data was conducted. So from here, I'd like to share some of the findings to start with this juncture between the two participants in terms of international travel experiences. So Larry had a ton of experiences prior to the study abroad program. Fiona, on the other hand, never left the home country. So here's the excerpt from an interview with Larry as the globetrotter. So the researcher, the interviewer was asking, have you traveled abroad before? Larry was responding, I've been to more than 47 countries.
Whoa.
So when did you get to visit all those countries? Or 20. I traveled with my dad for his work-related trips. Then how many times have you visited the US? More than 5 times. So as you can see, the extensive resources, opportunities afforded by his family. And also, Larry was perceiving study abroad as a time and space to get away from his daily routine and also to escape, relax in the US. Fiona, on the other hand, I'd like to invite Bikram to read out the interview excerpt. We know each other fairly well.
Yeah, do my best. Fiona, a first timer in international travel researcher, how did you like your stay here? I love it as I had never been to such an open place as you before. What countries have you been to? Is it the first time to be in the United States? I haven't been to any foreign country. I have not even been to Japan. I have never taken a flight.
It was not because of her lack of interest, but she was not afforded an opportunity to leave the home country for the study abroad programs here. And here's like her posting on Band, suggesting her beliefs about the US and Americans. So like she was sharing before coming to the US, I heard many stories about the US, read books about it, and looked at pictures about it, which made me think of the US as a place of freedom and diversity. So Fiona's imagination of the US and its people as a community of freedom and diversity. And what's more, she was thinking of study abroad as an opportunity to verify, to check out her imagination. Okay, so the next finding, so both participants demonstrated the view of English as a tool for achieving something else down the road. But the nature of it was different. So Larry demonstrated his perception of English learning as an instrument for future international travel opportunities. Fiona, on the other hand, she was thinking of English and the usefulness of English proficiency as a tool to develop her technical knowledge in her college major. So here's an excerpt from an interview with Larry. I'd like to invite you all to have a look, but as you can tell, he had gone to Europe, Canada before coming to the US, even during his college years, So in order to go to Europe, he did an interview. In order to go to Canada, he had to work really hard to score high enough on the TOEFL and so on and so forth. And then about the study abroad program, in the study, he was sharing, 10 of us were together in the program, which was different from my previous study abroad, international travels, where I had to use English to communicate with the local people. So as you can tell, Larry was very motivated to improve his language skills, but only as a tool to travel further and more. Fiona, on the other hand, she was really focused on improving her reading skills more than anything else, as a way to have a direct access to all the technical knowledge in her college major. And what's more, she was using her own proactive strategies to improve her reading skills, sharing that the study abroad program was really beneficial for her speaking, listening, but not so much for her reading skills. Okay. And then the third thing I'd like to share here in the beliefs about an ideal English speaker. So both had some similarities, but when it comes to what constitutes the ideal English language speaker, they had different ideas. So here's the interview excerpt with Larry. So he was sharing, I want to speak my English. So as you can tell, I became familiar with American accents and used them constantly. And then I liked the Irish pronunciation. And then he had experiences with an Indian accent when he was in Canada. When he traveled to Quebec, he was amazed, So when he went to Belfast, he was frustrated. And then the British accent was very cool, So he's got all the emotions, descriptive adjectives as a tool to articulate, his attitudes when it comes to different accents. What's more, at the end of the post on band here, he wanted to have his own accent, his own English, presenting himself as a legitimate speaker of English. And at the same time, breaking away from the ideology of, self-deprecation or native speakerism. In the case of Larry. In the case of Fiona, so she was really thinking of standard English native like accents as the ideal speaker she'd like to become down the road, which suggests her ideology of what constitutes a good speaker being understood by other imagined speakers of English out there. She never got to meet, but she kind of imagines, you know. Okay, so to summarize thus far, so Larry demonstrated the extensive resources, opportunities. Fiona, on the other hand, no prior experiences until she was selected to participate in the study abroad program here. And then both learners demonstrated the ideology of English as a commodity, as a tool for something else down the road. However, Larry demonstrated he was driven to learn, improve English by his personal desire to travel more. And he was determined to get high scores on a test, again, to be able to study abroad down the road. Fiona, on the other hand, was motivated to learn English, to develop her technical knowledge, and to improve reading skills. Okay. So when it comes to the ideal speaker, they imagined, and Larry demonstrated the ideology of presenting himself as a legitimate speaker, and also he would not be saying things like, oh, my English is not good enough. Instead, he was very confident, he had the empowerment, to present himself as, a speaker of his own English. Okay? Shying away from the prevalent ideology of native speakerism. Fiona, on the other hand, the ideology of an imagined native speakerism, native speaker out there, and at the same time, devaluing non-native other varieties of English through the misrecognition process. Okay, so here's the implication of the case study. It's not uncommon for a host institution to categorize and lump together international students in terms of nationality or ethnicity when it comes to delivering an international program. So the findings of the study suggest the significance of differences in students' personal prior backgrounds and experiences in shaping their study abroad experiences or learning. And here are a couple of directions we could potentially consider, taking into account individual differences in study abroad program development, and also pursuing more comprehensive forms of internationalization. So the previous literature, including this study, has been focused on internationalization abroad or study abroad. So by extending the current model, looking into internationalization at home, so that students can receive the benefits of internationalization without having to leave the home university or home. And also taking advantage of the advancements in technology, instructional technology, internationalization at a distance could be another potential model. And lastly, early intervention by way of internationalization of K through 12 schools could be another way to pursue comprehensive internationalization of education. Okay, so this is it.
I love your presentation. I always find it interesting that students want to travel abroad to learn about other cultures. And I'm like, you can do that right here in this community, sometimes. And they overlook the opportunities around the university or in their own where they live, so, yeah.
Right, so international campus like Purdue could be a good site where, different diverse students get together and learn from each other
Right.
as a model of internationalization at home.
And then we're planning an international trip, and it made me like think of, you could do a simple survey to see like, what is your reason for wanting to travel, to see their dispositions or their understandings before you go, because you might want to address some things before you leave.
Absolutely.
So.
And also findings from that kind of a pre-departure orientation or survey could be included into part of the study abroad program.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
To inform what they do. Yeah.
Hey, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I see two hands. Sorry, I don't have your names, but please go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. Want to ask if, after that program, has there any changes in the identity or the cultural identity among the students that will be involved in the studies? Do they really start to realize a little more about themselves, or everything still stays the same?
So like, I got a hold of, couple of the 10 participants before the pandemic by way of an app. So like, so it's not really like representative, but nonetheless, I heard them sharing, although they were not English majors, they continue to, paying more attention to English in the Korean culture, Korean society, what's more, there are other data sources as well. I think especially as a teacher candidate, they showed more empathetic understanding of, children from married migrant families, diverse families in South Korea. I mean, historically, South Korea was always the sending country for immigrants or international education. More lately, however, there's some sort of influx, of people from outside. So these teacher candidates kind of learn to show or to have more empathetic understanding of the differences, not just language, accents, but also, many things out there. Thank you.
Yeah, I have two questions. What was the length of the program?
Okay, would you like to?
And
Yes,
then,
go ahead.
Do you see a correlation between the internationalization of the one student and his, I would say, lowering of his own effective filter, that he felt confident enough to create his own style of English?
The second question, can you repeat the second
Sure.
question again?
Do you see a correlation or connection between the internationalization of the student, because he was well traveled and had been around the world, and the low traveler, you say, and his effective filter being low to the fact that he can feel comfortable in creating his own English style?
Oh, that's a really good question. So going back to the first question, it was 4 weeks, requested by the sending university. About the second question, yeah, that's a really good question. Effective filter proposed by Christian.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Larry, the student in here, very, I would say one of the first volunteers in class interactions, usually like, at the beginning when 10 students line up, for any activities or any new place we visit. So in that regard, yes, I would say yes. Some sort of linkage, potential linkage between the prior experiences and also relatively low effective filter. Thank you.
I just had a quick question around, right, like, I think at the very end, you talked about how thinking about their, diversity, right, you have these like large gaps. So I really appreciate that, like, you highlighted that as you think about the student. And I'm curious, as you think about internationalization, what are the outcomes? Like, are you hoping there's, a lower self-deprecation, or what's the hope of that particular?
That's another really good question. Hard to answer in a sentence. One of the things I'd like to share with you is looking at the two cases presented here. Especially future educators, education scholars here. Paying attention to or being aware of cultural differences. But the thing is, when it comes to cultural differences, we only think of nationality, the country of origin, or ethnicity. But within each category, there's a wide range and spectrum out there. So that might be one thing. When it comes to the other thing, I think some of the questions were related to this question of broadening participation, expanding the benefits of internationalization for ideally all students. Okay, so that would be a good kind of a working question for all of us to address.
I think one of the things that really stood out to me was as they thought about the accents in particular, right? And so just thinking about would that support, it helped with Larry, right, to shift him out of the deficit orientation of various and a variety of accents.
That's great. So Larry, yes, he was not demonstrating any form of defensive views, which was really admirable. However, Fiona, on the other hand, I did not really listen, or I did not really make efforts to change anything when it comes to her opinions and beliefs. You're right. She was demonstrating, touching upon the deficit view of, non-native, or accented English varieties. So yeah, to confess, I did not really teach her anything. However, that might be something we can address, the different varieties, different ways of using, speaking, learning English language as some sort of empowerment. Absolutely.
So I'm curious, go ahead.
I just had a question, because I really appreciated your conversation around class and inequities, as far as students not having access to these study abroad programs or having access and not having the funds to go there. So in thinking about a program that I would really love to bring to Purdue, I'm thinking about the ways that funding is oftentimes that one thing. You could have the correct disposition, you could have the interest, the desire, all of that stuff. But when it comes down to that financial support, that's oftentimes a big barrier. So any suggestions or any ideas as far as how to mitigate, besides, the universities helping to support, or the host or the sending country helping to support those folks, but just thinking about any ideas as far as how to help mitigate those challenges.
That's a really good question. When it comes to funding issues, it's not a kind of double whammy. They have to pay for the program, and also they are gonna lose the opportunity to earn somewhere salaries.
Yeah.
To be very honest, I wish I had some sort of answer keys out there. I'm not the number guy. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I was gonna ask the same question, so thank you. But, and Sunny's back there, but, we just got word that the scholarships that we provide for our study abroad students got cut. And so we're really from that, right? Because that really makes a difference especially for some of our students that were traveling abroad for the first time. So, but it's just such a really important point. But I was curious about how within the group, and so it seems like Larry was very, very self-confident. And so was he intimidating to the other students? Did they look at him as a role model? What was that dynamic, with that social class difference and obviously probably a linguistic difference? What was that dynamic like?
So on top of that, there was personality difference.
Yeah.
On top of that, there was age difference.
Gender difference.
I don't think I shared this. Larry was one of the older participants, and also gender fit was right. So it's kind of murky. So yeah, it was really nice to see the 10 students coming from different major programs, by the way, from the same sending university. Nonetheless, they got along pretty well, I would say. Yeah, they were very supportive of each other and such. So when it comes to Larry, yeah, he was different, Nonetheless, I would say the program went smoothly.
Okay, good.
So no accidents and
Mhm.
no calls in the middle of the night.
That's always a relief.
Yeah, but that's a really good question. So,
So that you did well on well, it sounds like. And
right.
was Larry like seen as a help? Like would people go to Larry for help or?
Oh, that's another good question. Yeah. I would say the 10 students coming from all different majors, like a STEM, arts, let alone English, even like a German as a foreign language, So I thought they were very different and kind of differential contributions.
Okay.
I don't think, and also we had a couple of teaching assistants the host institution hired. So when students had questions, the 2 teaching assistants were the source of information and wisdom, I would say. So instead of going to Larry, they must have gone to the 2 teaching assistants. If not, despite the age scale, I was an active participant in all the mobile apps and such. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So just a quick update, we're waiting for lunch. I'm told we should be here any minute. They have like 13 different deliveries coming on campus. We'll set that up here, but we still have time for a few more questions, so. Questions?
So I have a question. In study abroad, we do, not have a whole lot of, impact, tests or assessments that are, kind of be more, a main assessment or instrument that we all can use. It's kind of interesting because if you think about it, international study abroad programs are everywhere, like almost every institution has it. But then we don't really say, oh, look at this data, it does have this significant impact. Does your institution have any sort of instrument that you use to show impact? How do you, when we look for funds or endowment funds for creating scholarships and things like that, those can be very helpful. I was wondering if your school has that type of thing going on, or do you have plans?
So let me tell you, so I'm not the international program officer, I was delivering the program, and at the same time, I was the researcher, So there's like a university-wide, campus-wide office who does kind of a standardized survey.
So it's across the university.
Right, but the thing is mostly for domestic students going abroad.
Yes, going on.
And also, as far as I know, I might be wrong, but as far as I know, they don't publish. They're not supposed to.
Publish the results.
They don't publish. You never ever see any findings. I'm sure they use, when they make decisions and such, research-based decision making. I'm sure they do draw upon those findings. But the thing is, you rarely see in peer-reviewed publication.
Exactly, that's
It's unfortunate.
Yes,
Right.
because we did our study abroad leaders, we got together and tried to think about, is there a good instrument that we can use and compare different programs, what worked or what not. But it's really interesting to see that like there's no one famous instrument, and then we just use all sorts of different frameworks to say, oh, they went up in this framework in self-evaluation or whatever. So I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but it's interesting that we put so much money into study abroad when we can't really show it in these easy numbers, like how the policymakers love it. Yeah.
Right.
Have you ever used the IDI in technical development?
Yes, that's what we mostly have used, yeah, in the previous years. They're trying to use a different survey.
Yes, they're using
now,
that.
but we'll see. How that goes, yeah.
Another venue you might consult with is like a practitioner-oriented journal publication called Frontiers. You
Yeah.
know, so that's
Yeah.
another place where you see some like findings. But you're so right. You don't really see any like overarching pictures when it comes to, you know, it's in the applied linguistics literature, when it comes to efficacy or effects of study abroad, it's like all over the map.
Yes. I mean, the more complicated it is, it's harder and less research, you know? So there's
Right.
a lot of different aspects.
But like European countries have like a database around, like where you can see.
All righty. Thank you so much, Dr. Kang. Thank you for